Hey, how's it going? This is the final part of tic-tac-toe tutorials in Flutter. Today we're gonna implement invites with the FCM and multiplayer with Firebase. Here's what it looks like now. You open the multiplayer mode, select a user, he gets an invitation, and once he accepted it, a game is initiated. Alright. I'm playing with my other phone, running on iOS, and yes, that's what it looks like for when you invite a person, and let me show you how it looks like for the other side. You get a push notification, and once clicked on it, you see a pop-up with the accept or decline options. Again, game is initiated. Now if you have an Android phone, you know that there are notification action buttons. I think they started from Marshmallow, but there isn't such action buttons on iOS. That's why I implement those actions with a pop-up opened in the game screen. But for such an easy example, I could have just used a tap on notification to accept the invitation. Just wanted to see how to implement those actions. And that pop-up was quite tricky, because here's where I initiate FCM listeners. I do it in launcher screen, which is my home screen in its data function. And it really matters where you do that, because if you set up FCM listeners in another screen, which is deeper in your hierarchy, for example like multiplayer, you're not gonna have it working correctly. The reason why is that my handle message function uses a context to create a pop-up, and it's not like an application context, it's the context of a particular screen. So if you initiate FCM in some deeper hierarchy, like in this screen, you click on the push notification, and that context won't be viable to create a pop-up. I don't know if it's possible to get an application context so that, like for example in Android you would do that, but yeah, initiating FCM in a highest hierarchy or your launcher screen works well. Now let's get a bit into how my backend works. I have a cloud function. It's used for sending invites, accepting them. It's not that clean as I could have it, but all my notifications have a data payload. This click action is required for Android. Then I have from ID, it's a user ID, from push ID for simplicity, from name, and the type. This one actually I don't need. If it's an invite, then I want to have it as a notification type, simply by adding title or body, or both. You have it as a notification. Again, notification FCM type displays your push notification by default. If it's just a data type, so for example if my payload doesn't have any notification key, then it's gonna be a data notification and there won't be push notification displayed by default. I actually had an issue with iOS that my data messages are not handled. I don't know why. Only notification messages are handled. That's why basically I have all my notifications are of notification type. So when user accepted your invitation, it's just a regular notification. And then I'm using this messaging sent to device using FCM token, payload, and options for high priority. Let me show you how I invite users. Here's my listener. On tap listener to invite a user using the HTTP Flutter library for networking. I create this request to the URL. Now I want to talk about one interesting thing in Flutter is how to pass a data into other screens. For example, in Android you would use a bundle for intent, when starting other activities. I'm not sure what you would do on iOS. Here's how it works in Flutter. You create a navigator and then push a material page route, and then I initiate my game. It's a stateful widget, which is a screen in Flutter, and you just pass your arguments in the constructor of this screen. For example, in Android, it's like a anti-pattern. You don't pass arguments to activities or fragments in constructors because they're gonna be lost on screen orientation change. But in Flutter, it's handled by default, so you don't worry about the screen orientation. All those variables, those, I pass them to the game state as well in a constructor. All of those are saved on screen rotation. So, alright, and now let's get to the Firebase Multiplayer game, how I implemented that. I have a game stable, and game ID is generated by combining two user IDs. Field is displayed via those kind of keys, row column with the underscore in between, and those are from my Android app. For Flutter, I have X or O values. Not the cleanest solution now because I need to refactor it, but here's how it works. And restart function is implemented via Firebase as well. So I just have an extra key for restart, set it to true, and here is my Firebase listener. You have an onChild edit, a listen, and listen for event. Checking for a key. If this key is restarted, then I clean up the game and start it again. I hope it makes sense. It's pretty simple. All this code you're gonna find in the description. I have it on GitHub. Alright, and one more interesting thing about Flutter I wanted to mention as well, which is underscores. If you watched my previous videos, you know that they bugged me a lot in Dart. And I thought about, like, do I even need them? And if you're an Android developer, you're familiar with the Google source code and their guidelines. For private variables, now I'm just writing some Java code. So for private variables, they have this M and let's say a variable name, right? For static variables, they have an S and some other things. But the thing is that you don't have to do that if you don't work at Google, right? So most of people don't use these conventions for naming their Java variables. I think I should do the same with Dart in some cases, not in all. Let's say we have this state and this class is not initiated outside of the Flutter context, Flutter architecture. So we're not gonna create a new instance of this state and call its functions. That's why it basically just does not make any sense to bother about private or public visibility of your functions, because they're not used outside of. You should only bother about visibility if you're writing an API or a model for like a user. Maybe you would want some variables to be private and not visible, and for other people to understand your intention easier. In a lot of cases, you would have those kind of functions which isn't an API, and it just looks so much cleaner without those underscores. So I started to remove the underscores, and even if Google says that you should use underscores, right? You don't have to follow those guidelines because you don't, if you don't work at Google. Of course, if you write in a library or an API or some models and stuff, you should use underscores. But for other stuff, you could simplify by removing them, and it's gonna look so much clearer. Alright, it wraps for Flutter Tic Tac series. You can get the source code in the description. There are probably lots of bugs. I'm still not sure about why I wasn't getting my callbacks for data messages on iOS. those weren't called with the data messages. No, on message, all of them basically weren't called with the data messages. I don't know why, but I'm definitely gonna fix few more bugs in this repo. Alright, I hope it was useful. Click like if you liked it, subscribe. I'll talk to you later.